The darkness of the night can conceal many secrets, but in the small town of Redwood Valley, there are certain urban legends that prefer to operate in broad daylight. And the most feared legend, or perhaps, depending on who you ask, the most protective, is that of the Bandidos MC. To most people, they are the very definition of danger on two wheels. Leather, tattoos, roaring machines, and a history that would make anyone cross the street. They are known to own the highways, loyal only to their code, and supposedly enemies of law and order. But the truth is almost always more complex, woven into the background of a world that few dare to understand. For the general community, they are the outlaw bad guys riding Harleys, but for some lost souls teetering on the edge of ruin, they are the last resort, the fallen angels who arrive in the middle of chaos. Tonight, that chaos was found in a modest house at the end of a quiet street, where loud screams were punctuated by the deafening sound of things being thrown and shattered. Inside, Sarah, an exhausted and terrified mother, was desperately trying to shield her two children, David, 12, and Emily, 7, from the uncontrolled rage of her husband, Mark. Mark wasn't a bad man all the time. In fact, for long stretches, he could be the loving father and dedicated partner she had married. But under the influence of alcohol and serious anger control issues, he transformed into a destructive force that struck fear into the hearts of his family. Tonight was one of those dark nights where the smell of stale liquor mingled with the air and domestic violence erupted with brutal, predictable force. Sarah was trapped in the children's bedroom holding Emily, who was sobbing silently against her chest. David, meanwhile, sat stiffly in the corner, his eyes fixed on the door, his body rigid. He wasn't crying, but the terror in his eyes was deeper than any tears. David's phone, an old, cracked model, was hidden beneath the mattress. He knew calling the police wouldn't help. The few times Sarah had tried, the police either arrived too late, or Mark had already sobered up, presenting a false version of calm that the authorities easily bought. The trouble would return as soon as the sirens faded into the distance. David needed different help, something that would cause an impact that the police dared not. He needed a force that wasn't afraid to confront danger, that operated outside the confines of bureaucracy, and that was known for its relentless determination. He had spent months reading, watching, and in a strange way, admiring the Bandidos MC from afar. They were the only hope he could conceive. He had the number. It wasn't the official club number. They didn't have one. But a number he got through an indirect contact. A cook at a roadside diner frequented by MC members. The cook, a man named Tommy, had slipped him the number on a crumpled napkin months ago, saying, "If the darkness truly knocks on your door and there's nobody else left to call, use this. And only use it if it's the absolute worst it can be." David never thought the absolute worst would materialize. But now, the sound of glass shattering in the kitchen, followed by a roar of pure rage from his father, made his stomach turn. It was now or never. With trembling fingers, he pulled the phone from under the mattress and typed the short, desperate message. Just 5 words, straight and to the point. He's breaking things again. He sent the text to the unknown number and tucked the phone back in its spot, his heart hammering against his ribs. Time seemed to stand still. He looked at his mother and sister. Sarah's expression was a mix of terror and utter resignation. He had perhaps sealed their fate, but he couldn't watch the destruction of his family anymore. About 10 minutes later, just as Mark's fury seemed to peak, he was kicking their bedroom door, screaming obscenities. A sound began to filter through the night silence. A sound that made Mark stop his assault dead in his tracks. It wasn't the sound of a single police cruiser. It was the sound of many high-displacement motorcycle engines. A collective roar that could not be mistaken for anything but a brotherhood in motion. The sound grew, louder and louder, until it became a deep, vibrating thunder that pulsed through the walls of the house. The entire neighborhood must have heard. Mark, a bully only when he was at home, paled and backed away. He knew exactly what that sound was. Everyone in Redwood Valley did. The front door of the house burst open with a violent crash. The air turned cold, not just from the nighttime breeze that rushed in, but from the imposing presence that filled the doorframe. Standing there was Blade, the president of the local Bandidos MC chapter. He was a huge man, with a grizzled beard, and eyes that looked like they were carved from ice. His black leather vest, adorned with the club's patches and the Bandidos MC insignia, reflected the dim hallway light. Behind him, what looked like a dozen other club members, equally large men, equally intimidating, each sporting the same leather uniform, were crowding the entrance, standing like silent statues. Their bikes had been shut off, but the sharp smell of gasoline and hot rubber hung in the air. The driveway and the front yard were completely filled with the two-wheeled machines. The Bandidos MC had, indeed, packed the entrance. Blade didn't say a single word. He just stared at Mark, who stood paralyzed in the middle of the living room, hands raised, panic completely replacing the anger on his face. Blade walked calmly, and with every step, Mark seemed to shrink. Mark tried to stammer out an excuse, something about a family misunderstanding, but Blade cut him off with a quick, dismissive wave of his hand. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Emily's faint sobs from the bedroom. Blade wasn't there to negotiate. He was there to enforce a type of justice that couldn't be written in a penal code. His gaze was a promise of pain and a warning. It was the law of the street, the law of the Bandidos, and the law was that family was sacred. And in that moment, Mark had crossed a line. The true story of the Bandidos MC was never told on the news. It was told in moments when they chose the side of the weakest, even if it meant breaking a few rules or, in this case perhaps, breaking a few more things than Mark already had. What was about to happen wouldn't be pretty, but it would be effective. Blade's eyes, normally sharp and assessing, narrowed to icy slits as he glanced toward the closed bedroom door, hearing the stifled cries of the little girl. That sound, the sound of a child's fear, always cut deeper than any knife or bullet. It was a universal trigger for men who lived outside the law but held a strict, often brutal code of honor, especially concerning the innocent. Blade didn't need to hear Mark's flimsy explanation about stress or misunderstandings. The broken lamp on the floor, the splintered kitchen door visible down the hall, and the palpable fear radiating from the back room were all the evidence he needed. The Bandidos MC might break laws, but they didn't break families. That was a line reserved for the truly worthless. One of the patch holders, a massive man named Grizz, took a deliberate step forward, his leather boots crunching on broken ceramic. His presence alone was enough to make Mark stumble backward, knocking over a side table. "You made a mess, pal." Grizz's voice was a low, gravelly rumble, utterly devoid of emotion, yet carrying the weight of serious threat. "When we get called in for cleanup, it usually costs more than you can afford." Mark, the man who moments ago was a screaming tyrant, was reduced to a frightened puddle, his drunken bravado instantly evaporated by the sight of true, organized menace. He looked at Blade, then at the line of silent, judging men behind him, searching for a face that showed mercy. He found none. The Bandidos were a unified force, and when the president moved, the whole world shifted. Blade finally spoke, his voice surprisingly calm, almost conversational, which only made it more terrifying. "You got a choice, Mark. We came here on a summons. A kid asked for protection, and we answer those calls. You hurt a child, you hurt a woman, you hurt a home. That's not how we operate in our town, regardless of what the cops or the newspapers say about us." Blade paused, letting the silence build, making Mark choke on his fear. "You can walk out that door right now. Go. Don't look back. Don't ever step foot on this property again. If you do, you'll be answering to every man standing here, and trust me, that won't be a conversation you walk away from." He gestured toward the open door, where the shadows of the motorcycles formed a menacing blockade against the quiet street. Mark saw his chance, albeit a humiliating one. He knew the reputation of these men. They were judge, jury, and executioner on matters they deemed sacred, and interfering with a family they decided to protect was a death sentence, or worse. Without another word, Mark bolted for the door, scrambling past Blade and the other members, tripping over the threshold in his haste. He didn't even grab his jacket or keys. He just ran, disappearing into the dark street, his heavy breathing the only sound apart from the receding thunder of his panic. None of the bikers moved to stop him. The warning had been clear, and the threat of their return was a lifetime prison sentence in itself. With the threat gone, the atmosphere immediately changed, the rigid tension softening into quiet concern. Blade turned from the open doorway and walked straight toward the bedroom. He didn't knock. He just gently pushed the door open, revealing Sarah holding Emily, both huddled together. David, still in the corner, looked up, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe at the man who was supposed to be the bad guy. Blade knelt slowly, making sure his movements were non-threatening, lowering his massive frame until he was on eye level with the children. His face, normally stern and unyielding, held a flicker of unexpected gentleness. "Hey, kid, you did good," Blade said softly to David, his voice barely above a whisper. "You were brave. You protected your mom and sister." David just stared, speechless. Blade reached into his vest pocket, not for a weapon, but for a small, intricately carved wooden bird. He gave it to Emily. "This belonged to my little sister. Keeps the monsters away." Emily, clutching her mother, took the charm, and for the first time that night, the terror in her face gave way to confusion, then curiosity. Sarah, however, finally found her voice, trembling with disbelief. "Why? Why would you? The Bandidos. Help us? I don't understand." She had always been taught to fear these men. Blade looked at her, his eyes serious. "The world sees the patch, Sarah. They see the crimes, the bad decisions, the fights. They don't see the code. We might be outlaws, but we have rules. Rule number 1, you protect the weak, and you never ever let a bully win against a child." David reached out for help the only way he knew how, and we are the only ones who can promise that man will never return. The police can't give you that promise. We can. He stood up, his leather creaking. "Grizz and Bones will stay outside until sunup. We need to be sure he hasn't hidden nearby. We'll find you a place, away from here, safe and clean. You won't have to worry about rent or food or anything. You pack what you need. Small bags. We take care of the rest." Sarah could only nod, tears of relief now streaming down her face. She looked at the men who had just saved her life, the ones the news called gangsters, and realized that the greatest heroes often wear the darkest colors and ride the loudest machines. The fear was gone, replaced by a profound, life-altering gratitude toward the men society had condemned. It was time for the next step, securing the family's future, a task the Bandidos would execute with the same cold efficiency they applied to everything else. As dawn began to paint the sky a pale, hesitant grey, the scene at the house was one of calculated, silent operation. Grizz and Bones remained positioned by the drive, 2 immovable pillars of leather and muscle, their presence a guarantee that Mark would not attempt a return. Inside, the rest of the Bandidos MC members were moving with a quiet efficiency that belied their intimidating appearance. They weren't looting. They were packing. They were carefully selecting essential items, clothing, cherished toys, necessary documents, and loading them into the back of a large, unmarked black van that had pulled up silently a few minutes earlier. They handled the children's meager possessions with surprising care, demonstrating a respect for the home that Mark had so carelessly shattered. Blade stood over Sarah, placing a thick, leather-bound notebook and a well-used pen on the kitchen counter, the only surface not covered in shattered glass or wreckage. "This notebook has everything you need," he instructed, his voice low. "It has the address of the safe house, a small place, tucked away, clean, and paid for 6 months in advance. It's registered to one of our shell companies. He'll never find it. It has a burner phone number to call if you need anything, and a contact for a woman we trust. She's an ex-police officer who runs a support network. She will help you with the paperwork, the school transfers, everything legal. She knows the code. She knows you're under our protection now. You don't talk to anyone else. No social media, no old friends. You disappear, Sarah. You vanish." Sarah looked at the notebook, then at Blade. The weight of his words was heavier than the jacket he wore. She understood the cost of this protection. She was trading the visible threat of her husband for the invisible, all-encompassing protection of an organization society deemed dangerous. Yet, looking at David, who was proudly carrying his little sister's backpack, holding the carved wooden bird Blade had given her. She knew it was the right price to pay. Mark was gone, and these men, the outlaws, were the reason why. "Thank you," she whispered, the words barely audible, choked with emotion. I don't know how I'll ever repay this." Blade gave a curt nod, his expression unchanging. "You don't. You raise those kids right. You keep them safe. That's the payment. We don't do this for medals or thanks, Sarah. We do it because we believe in our own kind of order. When the system fails the innocent, the street steps in, and the street is often more ruthless and far more final than any court." He turned and motioned to a biker named Reaper. "Reaper, you drive them, straight there. No stops. You stay until Bones and Grizz check in." Reaper nodded, his face obscured by a thick, dark beard, his posture suggesting absolute loyalty to the command. David walked over to Blade, finally finding his voice. "Sir," he said, looking up at the towering figure, Did you hurt my dad?" Blade crouched down again, meeting the boy's gaze directly. "Your dad hurt your family, son. He broke things he shouldn't have. We showed him the door. He made his choice. If he ever comes back, he'll face the consequences of messing with people under our protection. You don't worry about him anymore. You worry about helping your mom and being a good big brother. You're a bandido now, David. Not by patch, but by courage. You called for help when no one else would. You protected them. This subtle validation was more powerful than any cash reward or material gift." David stood a little taller, clutching his sister's hand. He saw the world in a new light. The lines between good and bad were blurred, smeared by the reality that sometimes the ones who wear the black hats are the only ones willing to play by the rules that truly matter. Blade's crew were the Dark Knights of Redwood Valley, dispensing a brand of rugged, uncompromising justice that the law simply couldn't touch. The final items were loaded. Sarah and the children, guided by Reaper, entered the van. As the engine started, Blade gave one last look at the ravaged house, a reminder of the ugly world they were leaving behind. He then mounted his own bike, and the rest of the crew followed suit. One by one, the powerful engines roared to life, a deep, resonant symphony that announced their departure. The Bandidos MC left the driveway as suddenly and completely as they had arrived, leaving behind only the broken silence and the deep tire tracks in the grass. The house, now empty, was a monument to a crisis averted, and to the extraordinary, dangerous heroes who rode away, leaving a grateful family to start a new, safe life. For David, Emily, and Sarah, the fear was over. They were free, protected by a silent promise and the iron will of men who chose to be the light in the deepest shadows, proving that sometimes being a hero requires more than just a badge. Sometimes it requires a cut-off denim vest and a fearless brotherhood. The road ahead was long, but they were not riding it alone.